Welcome everybody to this week's SQL on FHIR meeting. Let me kick it off with just a quick check-in on outstanding items and work streams before we dive into continuing the conversation around the API. Give me a moment. All right. So continuing conversation on the API, dev dates proposals, Reen and Ward did not get back to me yet, but I imagine they will in the next couple of weeks. So if there are more ideas about SQL on FHIR dev days, or you guys are presenting your own proposals, let me know. You could potentially coordinate, or I think we had a couple of individual conversations, SQL on FHIR presentations at last dev dates, but it's just good to know all the folks are doing. I wanted to ask, next week on the calendar, we have Parquet on FHIR kickoff. I don't know if we want to keep kicking that back and just continue hammer through the API and to get to a state until we feel good about it and then go from there. Any thoughts on that, John?
I'd be happy to do it, but I do agree with you that maybe we should sort of get to a certain point with the API. I think
we can switch to Parquet topic as well, some next meeting, because all these topics require some time to think, so we can kick off Parquet and then in parallel.
Okay. Yeah, if everybody's good with that, and John, you're good with that. Okay, great. So we'll keep that there, and maybe we'll have a check-in on how the API work is going, asynchronous, the asynchronous work on the API. So the other work streams, I don't think we've had too much progress there. Still looking for somebody to lead that. Query resource, that's something that has come up in passing, but we haven't really kicked that off. So let's maybe do the Parquet one, and then after that, I actually was just talking to Brian Caney. He is going to try and join. This is still a difficult time for him, but it is on his mind to start kicking off the authoring and publishing work stream. So hopefully he'll be able to join. I'll coordinate with him to see if we might need to schedule a special time for that. FHIR to OMOP. I think, similarly, let's wait on that. Maybe after Parquet, after the API work stabilizes a little bit. And then we have US core use cases and Parquet, which you just mentioned. Governance, I haven't done anything. So hopefully I'll have a little bit more time the next couple of weeks to start kicking that off. And then marketing, again, similarly, I haven't done very much there. But if you guys are interested in helping out with any of those work streams, and particularly, want to be involved in the governance conversations or the marketing conversations, let me know. I know, Nikolai, you're going to Europe, the FHIR.
I'm going 15 kilometers from my house. This Europe meeting is going to be in Lisbon. And yes, and I have analytics on FHIR track, so I will present our work to the Europe guys. But this is the second time meeting. I don't know, last time it was a Athens Digital Forum Plus working group meetings. I don't know what crowd will be there, so I published and invited people, but let's see. So they give me 1.5 hours and probably 2 sessions. Yeah, I will just make some interest and collect feedback, and report it to you.
Excellent. Yeah, one thing I wanted to do, I haven't had a chance to yet, is just add a bunch of the major events to the schedule and start thinking about marketing and speaking opportunities. I'm going to try and get to that in the next week or so. So that's a quick review of the work streams. Any comments, thoughts?
I think I already told that. So we have few universities who are interested in OMOP to FHIR, or on FHIR to OMOP conversion. They do have some legacy code. We will have few sessions, and I think I will be prepared.
At the Europe working group, you'll meet them there?
No. They are from Canada. This is Canadian guys, and yeah. So I suggested them to publish what they did. They did transformation in SQL. But this is very specifically pathology guys. So, and we discussed that they will make sessions, show me what they have, and discuss internally, do they want to share it publicly? And that could be the nice starting point.
Got it. Okay. Great. Yeah. So just let us know. That's something that we haven't really kicked off, but I think as the API develops further and solidifies, then we'll start to weave more of these other work streams in to these conversations. Okay. Anyone else? Thoughts on any of the work streams that we just discussed? No? Okay. All right. Dan wrote in the chat, list of challenges. Okay, so just take that on, Nikolai and John. I think that's it.
I can clarify. Sorry, I'm trying to be in 2 meetings at once. Not going well. I'm going to drop off the other one in a minute. But I was just saying that, like, as we come across people who have implemented this, asking them like where they had to make assumptions about the FHIR data or the OMOP data, or where they ran into challenges, and just keeping a log of those in a document. So not assigning a task to anyone specifically, but it seems like everybody gets like 85% of the way with like no problems. They're like straight table to FHIR situation, straight value set mappings. And then like, depending on the project, there's like some really hairy bits, and people then start cutting corners and saying like, well, for my use case, I'll just assume this is the true, or I'll only do I'll hard code these things. And so like, if we could start documenting some of those, I think that might be really helpful in making sure we cover edge cases.
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to bring guys to Zulip so they start talking to us.
Yeah, and it'd be good, now I'm thinking about it, to check in with area and that group and what's going on there, because I haven't heard much or anything from them for some time. So, okay, cool. I'll just turn it over to you, Nikolai. I know we have some updates on the worksheet.
So we're going to have like 3 operations and probably unify parameters between these APIs. So the first one is file or to URL. It's just to kind of copy what bulk API guys. So the general idea that, we saying export file, providing some parameters. It is asynchronous. So we're getting URL, we're polling URL, and then like getting results from the file server. This is just a compilation of what was done in bulk API. So there are a few things to discuss. Like we need like decide on, do we want to provide like multiple formats or only one at one run? The since parameter, there's a idea to maybe introduce extra way expression so people can like add extra filter to the view definition. But do we need destination, or we want to keep it like implicit like bulk API doing that? And the rest is just copy it. And probably the main question is what the how results should be presented. So I would love to hear from them, because so the guys just did some custom JSON response. Yes. So there's an option to use FHIR bundle, but I would love to hear from them why they pick like custom JSON, and it's okay. We can switch to to bulk API response JSON.
Yeah, I don't think, just to be clear, I'm happy to talk about what bulk did and why the only way to do this. One nice advantage of using as much as possible from bulk is that we can just reference the FHIR async operation definition that's in the FHIR spec for kind of all of this pulling and deleting files from the server and manifest format and all that stuff. If we go custom, then we have to maintain all that going forward. So it'd be one advantage of just defining our operation, but then I put the link in the comment earlier, a little higher up if you want to click it. But one advantage of doing that is we kind of outsource that to FHIR infrastructure working group and don't have to maintain our own stuff. But if there's reason to do it, then we should certainly do it. It's just
this is a very strong point. So let's discuss with the guy. I don't see like real reason to do that. There may be only one comment that we probably want to, like, if we will provide multiple view definitions, we need somehow to link the output file with the view definition, and probably there's some place
there's an extension mechanism in the manifest where you can add an extension to each output file that has that. So like, so we could do that within the spec. The one point I will mention, just because I think it's a little weird, is why we have a custom JSON format. If I was doing this again today, I would probably use a parameters resource for the output. But at the time we created the spec, parameters was just kind of very roughly sketched out. It was not really in use in FHIR, and I guess it was like around R2. And so it wasn't kind of as established as it is today. So that's why we did like our custom get operation, and then a parameters and then a custom JSON in the output. But since that exists and folks have built that into a lot of servers and it's in the FHIR spec, it doesn't seem worth switching that. I think bundles were a challenge because bundles are really focused around FHIR resources. And I don't know if it's explicitly disallowed, but there's certainly like a lot of language about how bundles are used for grouping FHIR resources in the spec. And so I think it would be unexpected for people to have URLs in a bundle that don't lead to resources. So I think, at least from my perspective, like the logical choice, if you were starting from scratch today, would be to use a parameters resource for the output. But kind of given what already exists and how much documentation and examples and tutorials and stuff are already there for it, I think you'd have to have and the fact that it's extensible, I think you'd have to have a pretty good reason, I think, for it to make sense to move to a parameters resource or something custom there. I don't know. That's just my perspective. So I don't think it's ideal in all ways, but it's well documented and well implemented. And so there's that, to me, counts for a lot in terms of not necessarily changing it unless there's something really compelling.
But any plans to release like a new version of bulk API and replace it with parameters, or nothing like this?
No, nothing right now. We've talked about it a couple times, but in general, like, it's a JSON object that's getting returned. And so pretty much everybody can easily parse that. And most folks are basically using it to retrieve files. And nobody that I know is actually storing the output in any way. They're storing the files, but they're not super concerned about storing manifests. And so it just feels like breaking backward compatibility over that has a lot of costs and not a lot of benefits, other than just being a little bit more FHIR feeling in the output. But that's the logic there. And basically, if we wanted to tie things, we could add a parameter to each of the output elements that ties it to a view definition or we could use, I don't know if we can overload type. I have to look at how that's defined.
And how this format is described? Is it like logical model or just like completely custom JSON? Okay, so that's the only problem I see with this approach, because we could not like describe the response in FHIR terms.
That's fair. Yeah, I think that's a gap. This is kind of the only part of the spec that's a little bit weird, I think. That's really because it predated logical models and use of the parameters resource broadly and all that stuff.
But we probably can define like logical model for that and like reuse, or we can like say, I don't know, do we want to make like two type of response, like one with parameters and one with this?
Yes.
Because it's kind of, you say we can reuse, but it's hard to refer because it's kind of semi-official structure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a way to make a logical model that doesn't require adding things to it, then we could certainly add that to the spec, in a way that's backward compatible. I don't know enough about logical models to say whether that's possible or if you need things like ID and other things. But if we can make a logical model out of it, then I don't think anybody would object to actually putting that in the spec so that folks could run tooling off of it.
Okay,
I don't see why we couldn't describe a logical model that is compatible with the bulk API for this purpose. Maybe that's a starting point. We just see how far we get.
And I also think, Nikolai, if we were able to do, the other option would be to do kind of a one-to-one parameters resource translation. And at least then, like from a documentation perspective, things would be compatible. So if somebody's looking for like output and then, URLs under that, they would be able to understand that. So I guess that's another thing we could consider. It's a little less, it would mean that we would have like a slightly different version of a operation that's pretty widely implemented. So it's a little bit of a downside there. But I think if we can, matching the structure in a parameters resource would be better than, I think, going off and creating a whole new parameters resource format, unless we have a lot of differences.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
But do you think that like a bundle should not be used for that? Because I'm still curious.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely defer to folks who are maybe more involved in kind of spec development on the FHIR side. But my understanding is that bundles are pretty tightly constrained to collections of resources. And like, this is not a collection of resources. So
for me as an implementer, so that we use bundle like that, because in bundle, essentially you do the requests. Yes. And so like using bundle for requesting and like calling custom operation and bundle has like response. Yes. And request fields.
Yeah.
Which can be used to like respond with anything. Like,
but can it? I thought it was like most people return like operation outcomes or parameters resources or FHIR resources. Like, do you know of any examples of bundles that get like CSV files or other things coming out?
But in our case, we just need to return location of the file, yes? So for example, we can use response location to return the URI of the file.
Mm-hmm.
This is one option. I don't know where to put the view definition. It can be used like as extension, but the idea was to use response location to return the URL of the file and just skip the resource part and maybe reuse the full URL part. I don't know. So, but it's say, okay, it's URI for resource.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think you could probably technically do it, but it feels like if we're going to stretch bundles into something that they're not intended for, we might as well just use a parameters resource.
Yeah, the parameters resource is good. The bundle is good as well because SDK already have like bundle resource, yes. And if we would be able to fit into these elements, people will like don't need any extra SDK to parse this response.
Yeah, but you still need like extra, like if you're downloading files, you still need to like write code to do that. And so I feel like parsing a bundle versus parsing a parameters resource, maybe parsing a JSON object's a little bit harder, but like you still have to do custom stuff anyway. So as long as you're doing custom stuff, I don't know if it matters that much, like what format the data's coming in. Like, I guess if you have code to like download, get a bundle and then grab all the resources, I don't know that you're going to be able to reuse that code anyway. And so then we're just kind of maybe creating some confusion around the bundle, but I don't know what there's not a huge benefit to that to me. I could see an argument for parameters resource over JSON object just because of tooling.
Okay, so let's keep discussing. I will create a separate topic for that in Zulip and we can discuss this part.
Cool.
Now, any other notes about export operation?
I like the idea of making it as close to bulk as possible so that we could even, potentially like take the existing bulk reference implementations and add like a minimal extra parameter or bring in like the JS reference implementation for SQL on FHIR and just do that as like a demonstration of these two things working together. I think we get more from making it closer to the sort of existing investments in bulk than making it different.
We even can probably do like unified client, yes, for bulk API plus like ViewDefinition expert.
Yeah, I mean, since some of the bulk clients allow you to put custom parameters and configuration, we could, if we stick to the bulk, kind of the bulk flow here and the bulk output, you could use an off-the-shelf bulk client with this just by adding the view definition parameter, which would be cool.
But what about destination? Should we like allow people to override destination or just keep it implicit?
Well,
what does it mean? Yeah, what's the meaning of destination?
I mean, can user define where to export?
Oh,
this is kind of, this is output format and probably like output something.
Like some directive about some choice saying like not a file in the expected location, but somewhere else.
No, I mean some bucket name where I want to export. But as we discussed last time, so the bulk API decided that it's up to server to decide where to export. Yes, not about the.
Yeah, well, the one caveat is like some servers have custom parameters for this. So I think like the Microsoft FHIR server lets you specify a bucket in Azure to put your files, but there's like a lot of background configuration, right? Because like you need the FHIR server to write to that bucket. It needs to be in the same, zones, or you need other permissions. And so like, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen out of band for that to work, which is why, so I guess my thought is that maybe works better as custom to implementations rather than like standard. Cause I think unless we want to go really deep on like standardizing cloud bucket access and allowing people to pass in different auth and all sorts of stuff, create buckets if they don't exist, delete stuff that's in the bucket and populate it with new files. Like there's like, it's kind of a big can of worms. And so I don't know, I'm curious what other people think. I'm not against it. I think it's certainly a good use case, but it just feels like it's at least one and maybe several custom parameters plus some kind of setup before you run it that needs to happen on the cloud config side. So I don't know how standardized that can be.
Sure.
I'm actually curious, why do we need to do that? Because, like, I mean, if I remember correctly from the FHIR bulk API, like, the return, like, places for the files are actually, and that covers the use case for having a bucket. I mean, let's say Azure, whatever, cloud provider, they can add this feature that you can set a bucket where the bulk export result will go. And still, because each of those files will have a URL, which is in that bucket. So that kind of covers that use case. So why do we need to get into the territory of, cloud file systems and buckets and stuff like that in these FHIRs?
Yeah, I agree. So that's but okay, then let's define how extension custom parameters can be defined. Yes, is it the same namespace so people can just put like underscore bucket if they need? How you did this in bulk API?
We did a poor job of it in bulk API. Underscore, I think in FHIR usually means like a standard search parameter, or I forget what they're called. I think we wouldn't want to do that for the custom things, but I don't think we defined a way in bulk to add custom parameters the way we did with extensions to the manifest. So people just kind of named their own things, which could lead to some namespace conflicts. We could define a rule like, use underscore for custom parameters in the operation or something so that we don't have.
And the guys can describe it here, yeah, in parameters and operation definition.
Yeah. But I guess like technically like Microsoft could come up with a custom search parameter, a custom operation parameter that's then later added to the spec, which would cause problems. So we could define some rule like use 2 underscores if you're defining a custom one so that there isn't potential for that conflict or something. We didn't
or use implementation prefix like CSS. Yeah.
Yeah, we could do the Java thing, com.whatever, and then your extension. Yeah, like so we don't have any namespacing or kind of rules on that. And it might be good to have one, to have a convention at least.
Sorry, but again, maybe I'm missing a point here. I mean, why, if it's a custom parameter, like, I mean, anyone obviously for the FHIR server, they can add extra parameters and support it. But why us need to care? I mean, from a standards perspective, that, how people define custom parameters.
I guess I'm just thinking like it would be good to have some guidance so that if somebody creates a custom parameter and then in the next version of the spec, we want to create a parameter in the spec named the same thing, we're not like creating a future conflict. That was the reason for maybe namespacing. But I think it could be really simple. We could just say for custom parameters, that aren't part of the spec, use double underscore. And then we know we'll never use double underscore for a spec parameter, so you'll never conflict.
Or implementation prefix, or something.
Or implementation prefix or something like that. And we probably should have put that in the spec, but I don't think we did. It hasn't really been a problem in practice. Excuse me. Because we haven't, added a lot of new parameters. But it certainly is a theoretical, like it could be a problem.
Yeah, it's better to say how to extend and how not clash in the future. So let's discuss these two options. And we need a section that you can extend, yes, if you need, but with the custom parameters. Okay, another question, probably like so what if we want to export different views in different formats? Do we want to handle this situation or just keep things simple?
I mean, my vote is to keep things simple. You can always do multiple exports if you want to do a more complicated situation.
But can I list like several formats or only one?
You can currently, I think, only list one. Yeah.
Okay, another question, I know, how about like paging? Yes, so if bulk export, you want to like split into the blocks, is it kind of decision by server? Do you have any convention like that I can like patient 1 in DGSON, patient 2 in DGSON, like?
Right now it's by server. So server gets to decide how to split up the data among files. It's one resource type per file, but you can potentially have multiple files per resource type. There's a Argonaut proposal to do output by patient as well. I'll provide a link that I'm hoping will become part of the spec this year. We'll see. That defines a way to request organization by patient, where there's like a little header for each patient and then all their data after that. So we could consider something like that. That also adds paging to the output manifest as optional feature. So because theoretically you could have more more files than will fit in a JSON object. So that's hopefully going to be in version 3 of the spec. But right now is sitting in an Argonaut branch.
But the manifest is friendly, so in manifest people can understand that this view definition will be exported into like multiple files. Yes.
Yeah.
So is it like specified?
It talks somewhere about how the
So just repeating question, which means like if type the same, yes, so then it is the pages of the same. Okay.
Yeah, the same resource type. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
So how will we, like if we do it based on view definition? So if we had, say, 2 different patient-based view definitions, how will we identify the out items relative to the requested view definitions?
As I understand, like we will put like view definition URL in the type or something like this.
on each, so there's an extension parameter for each file type. And so we could do an extension and then and then something like, source view definition or view definition that would tie it back to the original view definition. Or we could, I think type might be optional. Let me take a look. We could, and type is, so I think if we wanted to align, that's a good point, John. If we want to align with the existing spec, type would be resource type, but then we could add an extension that's the view definition URL that would tie it back to the request.
We can still treat like, okay, so view definition is not the schema, yes? But if you
my instinct, sorry, I was just going to say, my instinct is that there's something missing here. And I feel a bit hesitant to say this because I haven't really worked it through in implementation. But I feel like, you kind of need to have a way of describing a set of views, but also then like either mapping them into names or having some other resource or definition that describes a cohesive set of views and their mapping into names. Because like I can imagine that because these view definitions are kind of reusable, right? So you might be referring to them and then saying, okay, I want this in this particular table name. And then I want this view definition again, but maybe in a different table name or with a different filter, or I don't know. But I feel like there's kind of that list of view definition URLs, I think is maybe a little bit simplistic, unless you want to make lots of different, like multiple different export requests to achieve something that's non-trivial. But again, I think we need to kind of I think we should just start somewhere really simple, like absolutely just a list of view definition URLs plus bulk, and then try and get it working for something, non-trivial. And I think some of these things have come out.
Yeah,
I still prefer to reuse the type attribute or introduce like view attribute because and if when you're talking about extensions, you mean extension is going to be like first class elements or like FHIR extensions?
So in the spec, there's an extension element defined for each that can appear under each output in each output object. And then under that, you're allowed to put kind of whatever JSON you want to put. So we could have extension. So for example, when people have the files with encryption, they've done like an extension with information on how the file is encrypted. And so we could do an extension that ties each file to a view definition. So
it's like this,
the same as type, but type we wouldn't have to change the definition of type.
But it is like this, and we can just put element extension into every output, and then say view URL or something like this.
Yeah,
and set it to the view. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. But to John's point, I think there's also another thing. So like when you pass in a set of view definitions to your export operation. So this would be on the, on the input parameter. If you're just providing a list, so I think first of all, we should use a repeating parameter for that so that matches the operation API. Yeah. But then if we have a repeating one, you could theoretically pass in like output table name or something that could weave through to this output manifest extension so that the client would know how to save it potentially. Or we could just assume that clients will have some way of knowing that. But I think, John, is that where you were getting at? That like maybe I want to have multiple table, like I want to have a patient address and other contexts. I want that to be, recall notices. And I want those tables to be named differently in the output so it matched. So then if we build stuff on top of them, that context is there.
But we have a problem here with the type because the output of the file is not patient. Yes, it is CSV or Parquet. So, and we kind of lying here because saying this is not the source type. Yeah, this is a type.
Yeah.
This is a patient.
Well, yeah, you can stretch it a little bit. I don't know. The definition says the FHIR resource type that is contained in the file. It's data that's derived from a single resource. So it does, to me, that seems okay, maybe. But I agree that we definitely need the extension so you can tie it back to the view definition.
Okay, so let's keep discussing this. Because if we're talking about it's interesting how the existing code can be reused. Yes. So because let's imagine the client who is starting bulk export, waiting for the manifest, and then, I don't know, copying files. Yes. To local file system like this.
Yeah. I think the smart reference implementation would work transparently with this API. You can specify custom parameters in the config. And it basically in the output, it just saves the files and saves the manifest to disk. And so for future processing. So yeah, so we could maybe use that existing, it would be great if we could use that existing client without any modifications, at least as a proof of concept.
Okay.
I guess I'm kind of looking ahead to the non-trivial use cases, right? So I want to get basically a whole OMOP schema out of this thing. And then I guess the related discussion is, do we actually support just passing in individual view definition URLs, or do we have some sort of enclosing thing, here's a list of, 20 different view definitions that all work together to create a set of tables that I can then use with certain queries that sort of depend upon this collection of view definitions.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, we discussed this last time. And for example, if property name of all of this view definition are the same, so we may treat it as belonging to the same group, or we can, I don't know, introduce.
I mean, one way that might be interesting to do that, and I have to look at whether this actually works in FHIR, is if we allow you to pass in an implementation guide that has canonical URLs for view definitions in it, potentially you could pass that to the operation in some way. And that scheme, which references view definitions, could then be kind of consumed and treated as and then the export would include all the view definitions in the IG. I don't know if that works, but I think regardless, that list of view URLs we should have two parameters, one for references to view definitions and one for canonical URLs, so that servers that don't actually implement CRUD for view definitions could still export that content. And maybe
I guess I'm thinking, if we had a query, and whether or not we actually have a query resource or not, a query depends on, it doesn't actually depend on a view definition. It depends on, a set of view definitions that are named certain things and that all work together. So I think we're kind of missing that level somewhere.
So that level, as I said, so we have an export stream. An export table is a more high-level operation where you just say export table, and what table where it's located, how it will be loaded is out of scope. And I was thinking that query resource may work with this export table operation because it's export somewhere. And if you're sending query, you're getting this stuff. And here, for example, there's a table name for the view definition. You may
And
discuss-
yes, and almost every query will be dependent on more than one table, though.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you're doing multiple export tables and then running query.
yeah, maybe, or that's a good starting point. I'm just kind of thinking ahead.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
is there...
I feel that if we start, like, we decided to keep it simple and close to bulk API, but if we will introduce this, like, all possible combination, like table names and all this stuff, I think we can get lost in this stuff. So let's maybe just, we decided, okay, let's just put into the file system somewhere in CSV on Parquet and let the people use. Yes, so that's my suggestion for this simple file export. Let's keep it simple. And then let's try to build on top of it something more abstract. Yeah.
I think I missed a little bit of this latest conversation because I thought we established that in one request, it should be possible to supply or request views of different types. Like last week, we were discussing of cross references. Like to John's point, when I want to get a snapshot and then I have an observation of a patient, then we have cross references. I want it to be created at the same time. Are we discussing that, we exclude that use case such that, you only have one type of view definition at each request?
No. So for export files, we do provide list of view definitions, which will be transactionally exported for you.
And they could be like, multiple view definitions for multiple different resource types, correct?
Yeah, sure. You're just listing URLs of the view definitions.
Right.
And
Okay.
which resource type will be exported, it's up to view definition. So, and even then you can just change.
I know. I want you guys to be able to reject it. Like I'm just proposing things, so I don't want to. Yeah, but I guess
it's okay. That's drafted and we see it. So don't use this.
It's too annoying. Change to editing mode.
Yeah.
But I don't like changing things non-transparently because all this is clearly up for discussion.
Everything is recorded.
Yeah. Good enough.
Is it
And that's
is a record?
View definition URL, which would be view definition URLs. I guess I can clear this comment then. Yeah. So I guess this is what I was thinking. If we do this parameter structure, this way we can define it as a reference type, and this can be a URI type. And then potentially like a server could not support any CRUD on the view definition side and just support taking in a couple canonical URLs and exporting them. So basically can implement a view definition in an IG without having to support kind of any FHIR at all if they want, which I think is a nice property. To John's point, like we could also, if we make these each repeating parameters, we could in the future nest stuff under it, like output name or something that could get passed through to the manifest or put in the file in some way, so that we could do other stuff on top of that. And then I guess an open question to John's point is like whether we have like an IG or a bundle or some format where you have a bunch of predefined view definition URLs, and you instead of passing them in one by one to the operation, you would pass in a reference to this collection and then be able to export that if you wanted to. Like I could see that being particularly useful if you had like an OMOP server and you wanted to support export of, some non-FHIR server that you wanted to be able to then kind of compute on using the same queries as FHIR. Then they could support this bundle of view definition output, and then you would only be able to generate that particular set of data. I don't know. You could also do that by having canonical URLs and passing in a bunch of them at a time, but maybe there's something nice there and you could do around naming of the files so that they could be more transparently used for querying without kind of ETL or transformation.
Yeah. Okay. So let's keep it discussing. So the one question: do we want to have some bundle with a set of view definitions? And then point to that bundle, yes, or the FHIR list resource, something like this, yes. Or we listing like URLs of the view definitions. We keep out of the spec how server will locate or like execute these view definitions, yes, somehow.
Yeah. So this particular operation, does it assume that it can locate it by itself, or do we have an option to supply it, or is that sort of a separate operation?
So that's kind of was idea which is borrowed from SDC. So that's why we introduced roles. Yes. So and we introduced role like which is called ViewDefinition Manager, where you can create and update and like keep repository of your definitions, like canonical resources. And the server, like which is exporting server, may connect to this artifact repository and get definition from there. Or it could be one server which like playing both roles, and then you can like create your definition and then say export with this set of. And another question, and I think that it's good to abstract this piece because some servers will probably have hard-coded few definitions, which they can only export, yes. And in that case, you don't have a choice. You're not able to upload the new view definition. Yes, they provide you a set of view definition they can serve, and you just choose it from it, like subscription topics. Yes, like guys did in subscription topics. So if this server is like we can split like generic exporters and non-generic. Yes, so then non-generic may work on with a fixed list of view definitions. That's why, like at least at this operation, we keep it out of the scope. Like we're just providing set of URLs, and how they will be located, it's a question. And if it's like I don't know, pipeline tools, maybe they just view definition lie on like S3 bucket somewhere and go and grab it.
I like the idea of using a reference because that brings in a lot of different possibilities, like including like, remote things. And it also could be polymorphic in that it could be either singular view definitions or like collections or lists or bundles or whatever.
Yeah, but I don't see the difference between URL and reference, to be honest. They both URLs. So what the difference between URL and the reference? Reference mean it could be not just URL of view definition, but like real reference, which like you can go and grab with HTTP client or?
No, this is more of a pedantic point. So like if we want to use FHIR types in our parameters resource, URIs and references are different types. So a reference is a URL that resolves to a resource. And I think URIs don't have to resolve to a resource. And so a canonical URL is a different type than a resource reference, I think, in FHIR. Although maybe somebody who has been more in the weeds, probably Gino, could correct me on that. But that was my thought, is just the only reason I'm splitting them out is because I think that will work better from a definition and tooling perspective, not because I think
they both URLs. Yeah.
One is resolvable on the server and one is not necessarily resolvable on the same server.
Yeah, that's true, but probably it's out of scope of this operation again. So do we really want to like differentiate this semantic? So, or we can keep it like just on a packet. Okay, so you provide me a set of URLs. Server somehow knows how to get this URL.
But I guess they would be looked up differently, right? Like excuse me, sorry, I'm like still sick. If you had like this, the canonical URLs aren't going to get resolved on the server necessarily.
I understand the difference between reference and URL.
Yeah, sorry. So, well, one is a canonical URL that's for the type of view definition it is, like if it's defined in an IG, and the other one is like an actual view definition that's resolvable.
You mean like HTTP reference, which can be loaded with HTTP client or?
Yeah.
What do you mean by resolve? Like getting like this logical operation to resolve canonical URL into canonical resource, or like getting through HTTP requests?
Sorry, I mean, yeah, I mean a logical operation to resolve a canonical URL into a resource is a different operation for a server than retrieving a resource that exists on the server at a URL. So I don't know. I guess
didn't get.
They both end up in resources.
Yeah.
But I've often seen them split because they're kind of different conceptually, right? But I got to drop. So maybe we can pick this up on Zulip.
Yeah, we need more people, John.
Yeah, we're at time.
Yeah, all I was going to say was, that the advantage of reference is that you can have like the logical reference to a URL, a well-known URL, or you could have a literal reference to something that you already know is on that server. And you can also type it, right? So like if we have multiple different types of resources that we can refer to describe a view, like say maybe view definition and like view definition list or whatever name we would have for that, you could also have that all in the one sort of field.
Now, it still could be encoded in canonical URL. So my first idea was to use canonical URLs. They may be resolvable, maybe not, but this is a server deal to decide how it will resolve. It may go to manager API, it may go to file system and resolve it. I don't think that we should introduce this very difference
this distinction.
This distinction, because users may be confused. So it's just a list of URLs. URL could be canonical URL for view definition, probably even version it if they want to specific version of view definition because it's canonical resource. Or it could be, for example, list probably not canonical resource, but maybe canonical. FHIR list for the group. If we go to list, doesn't have URL. Okay, got you. So if we will try to use list, it is not canonical. So then it doesn't have canonical.
Yeah, maybe list is not the best choice. I was just imagining some sort of.
Let's see what we have here. Yes, so here's a list of canonical resources. Because if it's list non-canonical, it's hard to distribute. Yes, so we essentially we want to distribute canonical resources. And then, I don't know, probably library. So the SQL guys using library for everything, but for us it's different to library. Yes, so it's a list, but I'm not very familiar with the library. So what could be done? So library has a URL.
I think for us it's a very, very lightweight.
They say this is a container for knowledge artifacts, so it fits what we describe. But I'm just looking. Is there any list of artifacts? So here is a content, which is attachment, but no, it's not But okay, so I can ask CRMI guys. Probably they have the similar problem. But maybe they're using bundle, but the bundle is not canonical as well, yeah. But this is extra idea that we want to have a bundle of view definitions, which we want to distribute as one unit, yes?
Yeah, I'm just imagining how's it going to look if I actually want to do something like FHIR to OMOP? What's my export request going to look like?
It could be huge. Yeah, I agree. So maybe having some container for that sounds good.
This might be best sort of implementation driven or experiment driven. It's hard for us to. I think it seemed like it's hard for us to think through it in the abstract a little bit here. We're feeling.
But I'm pretty sure that we have to ask the CRMI guys. They definitely should have a solution for that, and we can unify what for.
Well, when we write this up, call out Brian on it. He might have an opinion.
Yeah, we can just ask in Zulip.
CRMI. I had two kind of small issues, but you guys I didn't want to interrupt the flow here, and then I'm gonna have to go. One was the name of the operation itself. $view definition -export -files. I at first kind of feeling I was like, does that feel right? View definition export files. It kind of
that one news which I didn't tell at the beginning, but I posted into Zulip. So the Graham said that even if having logical model in capability statement error by FHIR, but he doing it all the way. So probably we can say that, okay, so, and if we can do that, so we can have a view definition /export. So, or export file. So if decide to use this hack and go with a capability statement, introduce view definition into capability statement, then we can have a resource type level operation. Otherwise, it's a system level, and you somehow should say that what is this? It should be SQL FHIR export or view definition export. So you need some prefix. Otherwise, it could not be just export. Yes.
Right. And I mean, that would conflict. But I mean, I'm going at it purely I don't know, a little bit aesthetics, but that's good. Number one, I saw that. And then two, yeah, I think you had flat export flat or flat export before.
It still sounds like introducing some extra terms, yes, and people will what means flat.
Yeah, I think people get really confused with bulk. I mean, like tabular, that's the language that I was trying to coalesce around in terms of the specs.
Ideally, if you could like scope it with like on resource type level and say like view definition / export, this like sounds very nice because we're only using this space view definition. Yes, it's only on the server, and we can use.
That sounds cleaner. That was one. And then one other idea was this might be more about spec itself. The idea of when you did have multiple in a single operation, what are we going to say? What's the conformance terminology around the consistency of the output, right? Like we're saying it should, maybe not to use that word, but like we definitely want use cases where the output is consistent, right? Is that a spec requirement?
Yeah, but I think this is the same what bulk export, the same problem. And I think we can just copy bulk export paragraph about that. Try to be like do transactional export, yes, and like at the same time consistent export. And I think this is for the guys who are implementing export to do it somehow like consistently.
Yeah.
And this is not a unique requirement for us. Yes, if you're doing just bulk export on FHIR server, it should be consistent as well. Otherwise, you will get the broken links and stuff like this. So,
I mean, there are use cases where it doesn't matter, right? But we could give it, do your best, whatever the language is in bulk.
But that's only what we can do because otherwise, I can imagine like half implementation will not be able to do it like in a transactional way. So because it's a bulk, yes. So it's really hard to, and I'm pretty sure that if you export Epic, you maybe get some inconsistent data
from 3 different data sources. Yeah, I just wanted to note that we should add that.
Yeah, sure. That definitely should be part of the spec. Yes, that try. Yeah, we recommend not like must, but something like should be consistent or try your best to make consistent export.
Yeah. All right, I have to go, but all right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
And see